I'm a paranormal investigator for the US government. Part 4, Post-Traumatic Doldrums. Written by Cryptid-Echo. It's been a little while, hasn't it? Almost a year, in fact. After Alyssa's little stunt at the bottom of the ocean floor, the agency decided to put a lid on my publishable case files for the time being. That, and being the only survivor of a catastrophic exit from this dimension that tanked a submarine and an entire deep-sea research facility, kind of puts a damper on things. To say that I was put through the ringer is an understatement. What, you thought that they would pat me on the back and say, "Well, you tried your best, Echo." Psst. The days afterwards sucked something fierce. I was put on administrative leave for the foreseeable future, as that was the agency's policy when an agent had had too much of an encounter at once. It was a BS rule, considering the amount of things that I've had to go through. But my boss was pretty insistent. The bullet through the head kind of insistent. My agency doesn't necessarily allow us to just up and retire or ghost out. There is a specific process we have to go through before we can wash our hands of it. Though the aftermath isn't exactly pretty. Once my my debriefing was completed, my administrative leave began. I was given a small apartment in a decently sized city of just under 1 million people. Just enough for me to drive myself insane with boredom. As you have hopefully figured out by now, all of the names have been changed because instead of saying redacted all the time, I get to come up with funny monikers for the places that I visit. There's that, and the fact that some of you smooth brains flooded my messages saying just how much you didn't like hearing the word redacted. I pulled my truck up to the parking lot of the Shady Acres apartment complex. It was decent enough on the outside, with white walls and balconies that middle-aged women with 12 kids dumped cigarette ashes over while standing there in pajamas. I shut the truck off and banged my head against the hard steering wheel, groaning in confusion at the current situation. The boss had handpicked everything about my admin leave, and even this crappy apartment was his doing. Knowing that this would aggravate me far more than any true administrative discipline ever would. I stepped out of the truck and I slammed the door, the aging vehicle closing with the sound of steel on steel. I liked older vehicles. They're simple, easy to work on, not as much stuff to break. And I could offload it pretty easily since some teenager with a mullet would pay double what it was worth. I slung a black backpack onto my back and I reached into the bed to pull out my suitcase. Setting it on the rollers, I pulled it along and I went inside. The interior was obviously nothing like the Ritz. A few dingy chairs sat against the wall to my right with questionable stains marking and discoloring them. Across from the chair was a reception counter, complete with an actual receptionist behind it. Farther back, there were 2 offices for the property manager and whoever else had an office. I rested an arm on the counter and I looked down to the woman, most likely one of the aforementioned balcony cigarette smokers. Her hair was done up in a beehive straight out of the 60s, with gray hair peppering the obvious blonde dye job. A few kilograms of makeup covered her face, so much so that when she smiled into her phone, the makeup stretched. Her brows lifted slightly in surprise. The placard on the desk said Barbara. However, her brows once again lowered to a normal position. "I'm here to sign into the apartment. It was set up about a week ago," I said in a pleasant enough voice. See, I can be nice if I want to. My brows lowered slightly when she outright ignored me. Not like she looked at me and said nothing, but she acted like I wasn't even there. "Hello? Hello?" I waved a hand, hoping to grab her attention. Maybe she was deaf or something. She looked up at me, an eyebrow cocked in one of those "really?" looks that instantly got her on my bad side. "I can hear you just fine, kid," she said. "Then say something earlier next time. Anyway, apartments, keys, need," I said. She scowled and was about to say something when a male voice shouted from one of the back offices. "Barb!" She winced slightly. The voice sounded like a dog being beaten with an ashtray, even making me look at the source. I couldn't see it, but whoever it was made that kind of sound from deep inside of a closed office. For a second, we just paused. Then old Barb started slapping things together. Literally, a paper here, a set of keys there, haphazardly tossed into a folder, placed in a binder, and then slammed onto the counter. "Good luck." Barb wheezed out at me. I took them without a word and wandered into the apartment building and down the hall. I looked at the apartment number and I sighed. 33. Well, at least it wasn't 666 or something like that. I walked through the halls and past the smell of skunk weed, vomit, and old pizza and cigarettes. Signs on the wall said no smoking, but obviously no one followed that here. The elevator that stood before me had graffiti on it, and the door wasn't closed all the way. I pressed the yellow button and waited, then stepped in when the door opened. It closed soon after hitting the third floor and rattled its way up, stopping with a ding, a groan, and what I could swear was the stretching of a wire that was already to its limit. I stepped out into the hallway and I made my way down the corridor to my room. After unlocking the door and stepping in, I surveyed my surroundings. The place was surprisingly clean and didn't smell nearly as bad as the hallway. The apartment had a single bedroom with a living room and a kitchen combo. The bathroom was right next to the bedroom door with a door of its own. A crucifix was nailed to the wall, and the boss had provided some basic furniture and a TV. I locked the door, chucked my suitcase into the corner, and fell back onto the bed. I probably should have put a black light on it, but honestly, some things are better left unknown. I fell asleep soon after that. My awakening was unexpected. I looked over at the cheap alarm clock on the bedside. 1:13 a.m. I blinked and then immediately froze. Getting woken up at specific times of the night was a huge red flag, and it usually came with a very unsettling feeling. Yeah, there it was. The feeling crept over me, almost suffocating me in the thickness of it. Holding my breath, I turned my head slowly to look up at the ceiling, only to be greeted by the face of an absolute monster just inches from mine. It was a bloody mass of flesh with few discernible features. A large mouth with flat teeth was definitely what drew the eye first. Its head was easily twice the size of mine, with a jaw that looked like it could open a couple of feet wide. The hollows where its eyes probably should have been looked like they were blown out with a shotgun, then filled with a strange bloody white concoction. Its breath smelled terrible, which was unfortunate because it just kept breathing on me. Sitting there and breathing, waiting, breathing. After I was sure that I was about to pass out, I blinked and the creature was gone. Just gone. No sound or anything. I took the chance of sitting up and looked around at the dark bedroom, searching for any sign of forced entry. Of course, there was none. Standing to my feet, I went into the bathroom and I kicked on the light, immediately going to the sink and splashing water on my face. After I was done, I paused and looked up slowly at the very bottom edge of the mirror. It was red. Blood effing red. I let my head fall a bit and banged it on the faucet in frustration. Immediately turning away from the mirror, I walked out of the bathroom and turned off the light and shut the door. My adrenaline was flooding at the moment despite my lack of sleep, so I decided some brain-killing tele-action was in order. I walked into the living room of the apartment, turning the crucifix right side up as I passed it, since that was invariably a requirement to my survival. I plopped onto the couch and I pulled a blanket up around me. Wait, I didn't have an effing blanket. I cursed, balled up the blanket, opened the window to the apartment, and winged it out into the night air. Again, I went and plopped down on the couch, and now I was able to get the TV to come on to some brainless show that soon lulled me back to sleep. I woke up again to the sun shining in the window. I got up and shut the curtains, then went over to set a pot of coffee. After a quick shower and getting dressed, I filled a cup of coffee and I opened the binder to look inside of it. It was all the typical apartment stuff, nothing in it about creatures, bloody mirrors, things appearing that weren't mine, or dripping crucifixes. I threw the binder out of the window and looked through the folder. Nothing. I grabbed the holster and my 9mm from my bag and affixed it to the belt of my pants. Then I walked downstairs, coffee in hand. Barb was sitting there in her weird lycra outfit and weird hair. I walked up to the counter and slapped my hand loudly atop it, scaring the crap out of her and making her jump. She looked up at me and a look of terror came over her face, as if she was surprised and terrified. Shocked to see that I'm alive? Rules, give 'em up, I said. Barb hesitated. No, I gave them to you, she insisted. I walked around the counter, grabbed her hair, and wrenched her head backwards, forcing her to look up at the ceiling. My free hand pulled the pistol free and I jammed it under her chin. Give me the effing rules, I said through gritted teeth. I released her head and I stepped back, waiting. With trembling hands, she pulled out a piece of paper from behind her computer. It was printed, almost in memo format, with the name and signature of the building manager on it. I snatched them from her hand and I left the apartment building, shoving the pistol into its holster and pulling my coat over it. I jumped into my truck and I drove off. I came out of the grocery store a little while later and I tossed some bags of supplies in the back of the truck. Food, drinks, that kind of crap. As I sat in the truck, I pulled out the list of rules that Barb was nice enough to have given me after that little bit of persuasion. I read the list thusly. Greetings and welcome to Shady Acres Apartment. We are glad you chose us for your living needs. I skipped all the rest and went straight to the rules. Rule 1. Don't leave your apartment after midnight. Rule 2. Always lock your door no matter what. Rule 3. The crucifix is there for your protection. If at any point you see it turned upside down, turn it up again. Do not remove it. Rule 4. If you see an item in your apartment that you know you didn't have, get rid of it or the owner will come looking for it. Please do not throw it out of the window for the safety of passing pedestrians. Oops. Rule 5. Do not enter the bathroom after 1 a.m. and turn on the light. If you accidentally do, don't look in the mirror or you will be inside of it. Rule 6, and this is rare, but if you wake up at 1:13 a.m. and there is a creature standing over you, hold your breath and do not look away. If you do, it will eat you slowly. Rule 7. If you hear someone knocking on your door between midnight and 6 a.m., do not open it. Whatever is knocking isn't human. Rule 8. The basement is off limits to all tenants for safety concerns. Rule 9. If you answer the door before midnight and there is a tall man who says that he has a delivery for you, accept the delivery. Invite him in and answer his questions truthfully. Rule 10. The TV may start showing disturbing scenes and figures, some of which may even include your loved ones. Do not look away from it, no matter what. Rule 11. If you suddenly lose power in your apartment, hide quickly. Do not come back out until the power comes back on. Rule 12. If the crucifix is anywhere except for on the wall, leave your apartment and run as fast as you can out of the apartment building. Do not use the elevator. This contract is binding until the end date specified. We hope you enjoy your stay here. I knew it. I effing knew it. For the third time, I let my head drop and I banged it against the steering wheel a couple of times. I let out a scream of sheer confusion. The boss knew what this place was. The worst part is that I was going to have to spend the whole effing year here. I shifted into first and I peeled out of the parking lot. Back at the apartment, I walked past Barb without so much as a glance in her direction and went back to my apartment, making sure to lock the door. I flipped the crucifix once again and I set about making dinner. It was quick but filled me up, and I thought about the apartment building for a minute. Had the whole thing been a cover to try and get me killed? I didn't think so. The boss should have known that I'd gone through this before, so what was the deal? I turned on the TV for some background noise and I continued my pondering. I heard screams, breaking bones, tearing flesh, moans. It was god-awful. I wondered what would happen if I ignored it. My answer came in the form of a large gash on my left forearm. I cried out and turned to the TV, my arm bleeding profusely over the little table I sat at. Keeping my eyes on the bloody orgy, I reached around and pawed at the tabletop until my fingers closed on the remote. I pressed a button 3 or 4 times before finally hitting the power, and I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding when the screen went to black. I tapped the lock code into my phone and hit a speed dial number. Then I put it on speaker while I rummaged through a small first aid kit that I kept in my bag. The phone picked up while I was cleaning the cut on my arm.
Hello.
A mild-mannered voice came through the speaker. Boss, what the F is up with my apartment?
Oh, it's an apartment that happens to have a cryptid infestation. You've done this before. What's the big deal?
I don't know. I was supposed to be on admin leave, so I figured that I'd have a day or two of normalcy.
Admin leave is on my time, Echo. You've been suspended from the case regarding Dr. Lent, not from everything else.
Okay, so why not just take me off the case and shift me to another one instead of sending me in blind?
Well, this is part of your evaluation. And the powers that be want your status to be offline. I'm not sure why, but that's what it is.
He paused as if wanting to say more. It didn't last long before he continued.
You know the drill by now. Take care of whatever is causing the infestation, and if you can't, then burn the place down.
There was a click. He hung up. I let my head dip to the table. He wasn't going to give me any more information, so I decided to at least start the investigation portion of my job. Now that I was unofficially off of administrative leave, I walked around the building, starting from the top floor all the way down. I met a few people, most of them eager to ignore me and to go on with their miserable lives. It was almost as if I radiated an aura of constant annoyance that made people want to stay away from me. Funnily enough, I was fine with this prospect. When you are in a field that many don't know of or understand, it's really hard to relate to others. Soldiers, healthcare workers, and the like probably know what I'm talking about, relating to the general populace and all that. I didn't go into the basement in accordance with the rules, as I really didn't want to get mauled to death or something like that, depending on what was in there. I chatted up Barb a little bit to try and get an answer out of her as to what the deal was with everything going on here. Obviously, she wasn't really a talker, considering that I had my gun pressed against her jaw earlier in the day. So I turned to Liv. "Hey, kid." That voice from earlier, the dog and ashtray one, came out of the back office. I looked at the door as it swung inward and I sighed. I walked in and the door shut on its own. The man stood to greet me. He was about my height, maybe 5'5" or so, but he was probably 4 times my weight. He wore a wife beater that was stretched to its absolute limit, tucked into a black pair of pants. Suspenders sat on his shoulders and hooked onto the waist of his pants, and a tremendous gut poked out significantly further than his chest. That wasn't the draw to him, though. His arms were absolutely gigantic. His hands were of similar proportions. He stuck one out to shake my hand, and I accepted, watching his fingers dwarf mine. After our handshake was done with, we both sat down in unison. "My name's Tony. Now, I should probably call the cops for what you did to Barb." He sounded kind of like a mobster as he said this. It fit him. "But honestly, I don't like cops of any kind. I prefer to take care of things myself, know what I mean? So, I'll make a deal with yous. Don't F with my staff again, and I won't break your effing legs, capiche?" With those arms, he looked like he could bend steel. Yeah, I nodded. Capiche. I leaned back in my chair and crossed my legs for a moment. This guy was direct, and I liked that, so I decided to reciprocate. "I'll stop effing with your staff when you tell me what the hell is going on here, Tony." "Ah, them rules. That stuff's been happening for as long as I can remember. Just started up one day. First, it was kinda small, you know? A TV started showing nasty stuff, lights would flicker. Then people started dying. So I spent a few nights in the rooms to try and figure stuff out. I wrote down those rules, and now things have been mostly settled. If that answers your question, then get out of here." So with that, I stood and turned for the door. And with that, I left. A search of the exterior of the building revealed little to nothing beside weeds and cigarette butts. What a pain in the ass. I made my way back inside of the apartment complex and through the lobby, but I stopped at the top of the stairs that led down to the basement door. Tony was going inside and shut the door as soon as he did. I heard the click of a lock and I watched for a few moments. He wrote the rules, but was going into the basement. I checked my watch and I left Tony and his basement to head back up to my own room. The day had gotten away from me and I needed to get back. Standing outside of my apartment was a woman who I would learn was in her mid-30s, but she looked to be in her mid-50s. She had upper back length dirty blonde hair, and when I say dirty, I mean actually dirty, unbrushed and unkempt, like she stayed miles away from a bottle of conditioner. Her eyes were sunken in with bags under them as if she hadn't slept in months. She probably hadn't. A little girl stood behind her, the spitting image of her mom, clad in a light blue dress. Unlike her mom, she was perfectly clean. The mom was fumbling with some keys, and I looked over. Track marks ran up her arms, scar tissue had formed on the backs of her hands. I let out a silent sigh and I went over, deftly taking the keys away from her hands that no longer had fine motor control. I slid the key into the lock and opened the door for her. She looked up at me and just stared with hollow, dead eyes. Thank you, she voiced after a long, long pause. I took the trail at the end of her sentence and I just ran with it. I'm across the hall from you. Tracy, this is Marie, she said as she waved down to the little girl who curtsied up towards me. Hello, thank you for helping my mama, she said. I nodded. She too had the same French accent and it was absolutely endearing. I looked down at her for a moment and nodded. Take care of your mom, okay? She blinked. I always do, she said. That broke my heart, or what was left of it, but outwardly I remained stoic. I looked at my watch. It was 9 p.m. If you need anything, I'm across from you. Good night. Bonne nuit, she replied and went inside after her mother, closing the door and locking it. I shook my head, unlocked my door, and entered my apartment, locking the door back. I turned the TV on and had just enough time to step away from the door when there was a knock at it. I hung my head for a second. I glanced at my watch and then I opened the door. A man stood outside, clad in an old delivery man's uniform. Though I hesitate to call him a man since his face was decomposed, his flesh was rotten and muscle was exposed. His voice was demonic, otherworldly, and I sighed.
Delivery.
Come in, take a seat, I answered. He did so. For being decomposed, he really didn't smell, thankfully. He sat down in one of the 2 chairs surrounding my little round dining table. I figured that this was going to be a long night, so I brewed 2 cups of coffee from a Keurig and sat one in front of him. He took it and held it in his hand.
Redacted, redacted, redacted. This is your name.
This shocked me to my very core. One thing that all of these Reddit stories get right, and even a lot of other works of fiction, is the power of a name. This is why I could count on one hand the amount of people who knew my first name, and fewer still who knew my full name. But this cryptid had just rattled it off like it had been plastered on a billboard. Without thinking, I blurted out, "Nope."
Be honest.
He croaked out. I was about to snap back when a searing hot pain went through my chest, like he had grabbed my heart and gave it a nice, firm squeeze. And I mean my actual heart, not what remained of my messed up personality. I fell out of the chair to the floor, banging my head and sending my body into an arc. Cries of pain were the only thing that I could manage. All right, that's my name," I screamed. I just barely managed to get it out. Suddenly, the pain stopped. I was left on the floor, panting, trying to get over the pain. Eventually, I did so, and I pushed myself upwards, using the table for support. "That's rude," I spat and climbed into my chair, glaring daggers at him, but knowing that it would do no good. He asked me a few questions, and I indeed answered truthfully, knowing the pain and possible death that would come if I did not. His last question really sent me through a loop, though.
Why do you hate humans so much, but try to save them from us?
That is an oddly specific question. I held up my hands when he started to shift. All right. I don't hate humans. They just don't understand or get what really happens. To be honest, it's as much an escape for me to save them from you.
Elaborate.
Of course. Thinking of the pain, I did so. 6 years ago, our agency was bigger than we are now. We had more of a presence in the government meetings and such. But we were infiltrated and partially destroyed.
By who?
He asked, still holding his cup of coffee, not even trying to drink it. I really hadn't expected him to. I groaned softly. The FBI. Their agents had been recruited into our organization under the guise of cross-training agents to better deal with cryptids. We already have better training than they do, but they've always been the larger organization, so it made sense at the time to get more of them on board. The thing is, the FBI has a real problem with being territorial. As in, they believe that everything that happens within the US is their jurisdiction. We made it plainly clear that they would never be able to fully deal with the things that we dealt with. After a while, a year or so, our director at the time and theirs got into a spat concerning a joint operation. Instead of letting us call the shots, they decided to kill everything, including us. I paused and took a sip of my coffee, bile rising in my throat as I thought back to those days. I continued. The agents that were training turned on us, and it became the largest interagency conflict in history. After the dust settled, they had killed 18 of us, while we had killed about the same number of them. This was all during an operation, mind you, and the cryptids involved had no problem taking advantage of the disarray, and they began feasting on the bodies, then making some of their own. After the ceasefire, we agreed to stay out of each other's way. There's more to it, obviously, but that's the gist of it. He seemed satisfied with the answer. The rest of his questions were really simple, but they were still deeply personal. Eventually, he stood and left. The small package he delivered remained, and I set it on the counter next to my coffee pot. I turned the crucifix right side up, took a shower, and went to bed. I woke up at 1:13 a.m. again to the same exact creature. The same thing happened, and he eventually went away. The next morning I slept in, not bothering to set an alarm. When I got up, I reported to the boss, making sure to let him know what had happened. Honestly, the next couple of days were a blur. I took the liberty of going out and doing a few things during the day, only to return at night and make it inside to face the witching hours. One night I heard shouting from inside of Tracy's apartment. I made it to the door just in time to see Tony come out of it with a man held under his arm. "You think you can come in here and mess with my tenants, eh?" he said to the guy. He paused when he saw me, a grin spread over his face. "Hey, how's the apartment treating you? You ain't dead yet. Good things." He was in a much more chipper mood today, probably from the guy under his arm. And when I say under his arm, I mean that he was holding a skinny dude under it like a bag of potatoes. Yeah, it's not bad besides the weird creatures and stuff. What you got there? I inclined my head towards his captured miscreant. Some wise guy thinking he can sell drugs. Tracy don't do that no more, you know? Gotta keep her on the up and up, poor thing. Especially since her little girl died a while back, you know? I paused. Wait, what? You mean Marie? An equal look of shock came over his face. You know her? What you ain't telling me? His visage began to look dangerous. I held up a hand. A couple of days ago, I helped Tracy into her apartment. She had a little girl with her named Marie, but she was decidedly not dead. Tony mused over the explanation. Normally, I'd call BS, but with this place, Marie was a cute little thing. Used to help her mama a lot after rehab. She used to come around and sweet-talk that old suitcase Barb for some candy and stuff. She died about 3 years ago during a police chase after being kidnapped. I nodded to him. Sorry about that. But I know what I saw though, Tony. She was as real as day. He nodded. Be good to her. If you see her again before midnight, tell her to visit old Tony, eh? I nodded again. Will do. Thanks, kiddo. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'm gonna go and break this guy's legs. You wanna come? I laughed, an actual, genuine laugh. I'm good, Tony. Have fun. Suit yourself. Come on, you bastard. We're gonna have a sit down. You and me. He walked off like a kid who had just gotten some candy. I stepped back into my apartment. I must have a bad luck streak because I turned on the TV and immediately it showed some nasty crap again. I turned it back off, flipped the crucifix once more, and took a shower. As I stepped out and got dressed into something more bedtime appropriate, I heard a knock at my door. I looked at my watch. 12:30 a.m. For a moment, I didn't bother to care. But then something pulled at me. I walked over to the door and pressed my head up against it. Who is it? Marie. I paused, searching for the right words. You aren't human, are you, Marie? Not anymore. What happens if I open this door? A few seconds went by, like she was hesitating. Then I will kill you. I couldn't help the chill that went down my spine. Of course, Marie was already dead. I knew Tony wasn't lying, but for some reason I had to ask. Why would you kill me if I opened the door? Because she wants me to. I blinked. I've never gotten this far with an apparition like this. Who? She waited again before answering. The lady that used to give me candy. Barb. That bitch was the cause of all of it. Had to be. All the pieces fit. Her not wanting me to live by not giving me the rules. Hating me for getting her in trouble with Tony. My earlier actions involving a pistol and her head. I should have doused her with holy water earlier. Sorry, kiddo. I'm not gonna let you in, I told Marie. I understand, Anna. You may want to put some clothes on, though. You will be leaving soon. Good night. For wanting to murder me, she was sure polite. However, that sentence really stuck out in my head. I'd be leaving soon. What the F did that mean? Erring on the side of caution, I got dressed, packed up what I could, and I laid back down on my bed and fell asleep. I woke up a little later and looked at my clock. 1:13 a.m. Looking upwards, I saw a now familiar face staring down at me. Except now its mouth was wide open. Something was different. It started to rise as if about to get off of me when I caught a piece of metal out of the corner of my eye. The crucifix. It moved. An oppressive darkness began to seep into my apartment from the ceiling, covering it and beginning to slide down the walls. The creature above me hadn't left. Crap, I rolled out from under it just in time. Its head and its body shot downwards and attempted to bite my head and shoulders clean off. It got a mouthful of mattress instead, and the shriek at losing its meal made me cover my ears. The darkness, like oil, began crawling down the walls, and I barreled out of the apartment at full sprint. Down the hall I went, and remembering the rule, I didn't wait for the elevator. The darkness was seeping into the building itself, and people began to run out of their apartments in terror. Some were not fast enough, and long arms tipped with long fingers began grabbing them and pulling them into the ever-widening abyss. Some were bitten by mouths that shot out from the ceiling, while other, smaller monsters began climbing into our world to tear the residents apart. The creature I had personally escaped from was hot on my heels, tossing residents into the abyss as it came for me. I ducked, dipped, dived, and dodged my way down the hall and onto the staircase. Down 3 flights of stairs in a few bounds. Screaming could be heard from above me, and I knew there was nothing I could do. I burst out into the lobby and was about to run for the door when something collided with my skull and I fell to the ground in a daze. Someone was dragging me into the basement by my feet. The asshole even let my head hit each step on the way down, and soon I could feel a wet spot on the back of my head. My body limp, drained. I was sat up against the wall and looked out to see a pair of legs in garish tights straight out of an 80s workout video. Barb. She stood over me with a shit-eating grin on her face. "Oh, it looks like you got a couple of bruises getting down here, kiddo. Don't worry. The 3 of us are gonna have some fun." "Wait, 3 of us?" I groaned out. "Oh yes, I can't even wait to see what he's gonna do with an uppity little twat like you." As she said this, the same disturbing creature that had hunted me for days in the early hours of the morning clicked forward. I got a good look at it now. 2 big arms ending in hands with long fingers. Its torso was about 6 feet tall. The torso sat on a strange bulbous abdomen, like a spider, except that it only had 4 legs that ended in points that I knew were probably ridiculously good at stabbing things. "How did you?" She cut me off. Oh, don't you worry about that, sweetie." She turned to the creature. "Go on, honey, eat up." A roar came, and I winced, waiting for the death that was soon to come. "What?" Barb yelled in obvious shock. Tony. Good old Tony. Fat Tony with the tree trunk arms. He blasted through the door like a cannon and speared the creature. No fear, no care. Just a football tackle that could have shattered a cinder block. I felt bad because I knew Tony would be overpowered, but I couldn't move as well right now, and I had to find a way to burn this place down. Almost like a cliche, I looked over and I saw a backup generator with gas can next to it. I began crawling over to it. I made it to the gas can and took the lid off, then pushed it over and spilled out the contents. Barb's knee rammed into my back when she jumped on me, causing my breath to immediately leave my body. She grabbed my hair and forced my face into the floor. "I don't know what she sees in you, but I'm effing done with it," she hissed. "You didn't," I gasped. She stopped, Didn't? Didn't what? Come on, sweetie, spit it out before I kill you. I turned over slowly. You didn't take my gun. Her eyes widened as the pistol I held in my hand went off with a quick pull of the trigger, sending a 9mm straight into her brain. She went limp immediately, and I rolled her off of me. I looked up to see how badly Tony was doing. Remember when I said earlier that you won't be out muscling a cryptid? That didn't apply in Tony's case. To my complete shock, the man had not only subdued the creature, but was currently smashing it into the ground with a sledgehammer. I laughed. Tony, match. What? He looked back at me, confused. Lighter, match, torch, fire, whatever. He grinned and produced a lighter and jogged over to me. He lit the fuel and for a second watched it go up instantly. Then he tossed me over his shoulder and ran out of the basement. We sat outside watching the building burn. The time said 6:20 a.m. Tony shared a cigarette with me and we just existed for a little while. Hey, you probably know that I'm not just a random person by now, right? I asked. He nodded, taking a drag off of his cigarette. Yeah, I kinda figured from the beginning when yous took care of Barb like that. Well, you're pretty handy. Wanna come work for us, I said as I handed him a card with my information on it. He chuckled. Nah, I don't want none of that. But I'll keep this in case I need yas. He passed over his own card and I pocketed it. He stood up and stretched. See you around, Echo. If you ever need a place to stay, give me a call. I'll have my mother cook you the best meal you've ever had. He didn't wait for me to respond, he just left. When he did, I felt a presence next to me. I looked over to see Marie. It was after 6, so I assumed that I was safe. Hey kid, you're free now. What are you gonna do? I asked her. Free? She asked, puzzled. Yeah, the lady that gave you candy, Barb. She's gone now. She shook her head. She wasn't the lady who gave me candy. Not the first one. I shot up from my supine position and groaned as my body reacted negatively. Wait, what? She produced a small package. The same one the delivery man had given me. She asked me to give this to you. She handed it over. I took it and looked down at it. Who? I asked. By the time I looked back up, Marie was gone. I opened the box and looked at what was inside. A skeleton key and a note. I opened the note and dropped everything upon reading it. It read, I am always in control, Echo.